The mahogany dining table felt enormous without Noel's presence. Just 1 week after burying my husband of 32 years, I sat across from my son Wade and his wife Romy, picking at the dinner I'd prepared out of habit rather than hunger. The empty chair at the head of the table seemed to mock us all. At 71, I thought I'd prepared myself for widowhood. But nothing could have prepared me for the hollow ache that followed me everywhere, or for what was about to unfold. "Pass the potatoes, Myrtle," Romy said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. My daughter-in-law had never used a warm tone with me, but tonight something felt different. Colder, more calculating. Wade, my 43-year-old son, sat between us like a referee who'd already chosen sides. The boy who once crawled into my lap during thunderstorms now couldn't meet my eyes. "The service was beautiful, wasn't it?" I offered, desperate to fill the uncomfortable silence. "Your father would have loved seeing so many people there." Romy set down her fork with deliberate precision. "Yes, well, that's actually what we need to discuss with you, Myrtle." My stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" "Wade and I have been talking," she began, her voice taking on that false sweetness she used when she wanted something. "Now that Noel is gone, this house is going to be too much for you to handle alone." I blinked, confused. "Too much? I've been managing this house for over 30 years. That's exactly the problem." Romy continued, her mask of pleasantness slipping. "You're not getting any younger. And maintaining a house this size is expensive. We think it would be best if you moved somewhere more suitable." The words hit like a physical blow. This was my home, the place where Noel and I had built our life together, where Wade had grown up. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, though ice was already forming in my stomach. "One of those nice senior communities," Romy replied, as if she were doing me a tremendous favor. "Somewhere with activities and people your age. It would be so much better than rattling around in this big empty house." I turned to Wade desperately. "You think I should sell the house where you grew up?" "It makes sense, Mom," he interrupted, still avoiding my eyes. "And honestly, Romy and I could use the space. We've been talking about expanding our family, and this house has so much potential." The meaning crashed over me like a cold wave. They wanted me gone so they could claim my house. Then Romy's voice lost all pretense of civility. "Now that your husband is dead, grieve, pack your bags, and never come back. The house was never really yours anyway." Wade looked up then, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, uncertainty, maybe guilt. But then he smiled and nodded. "She's right, Mom. This house was Dad's, and now it's mine. You were just living here." Just living here. As if 32 years of marriage amounted to nothing more than extended house-sitting. I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt, "I'll need some time to." 2 weeks. Romy cut me off. That should be plenty of time to find somewhere suitable. 2 weeks to dismantle a lifetime. The morning sun felt different as I drove to First National Bank, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. Noel had always handled our finances, not because he didn't trust me, but because he said it was one less thing for me to worry about. Now I wish I'd paid more attention. Helen Patterson, the bank manager, greeted me with the careful sympathy reserved for recent widows. "Mrs. Henderson, I was so sorry to hear about Noel. He was such a gentleman." "Thank you, Helen. I need to understand our financial situation. Noel handled everything, and I'm rather lost." Helen's fingers clicked across the keyboard, then her eyebrows rose. "Oh my. Henderson, there are quite a few accounts here. More than I was expecting." Relief flooded through me as she showed me our joint checking and savings accounts. Modest but comfortable, enough to sustain me for years if necessary. "But Mrs. Henderson," Helen continued, frowning at her screen, "I'm seeing several other accounts. Some appear to be in your name only." "My name only? That doesn't sound right." "According to our records, there are 4 additional accounts. 2 CDs, a money market account, and a trust account established 5 years ago." Helen's voice held a note of surprise. "May I ask, did your husband ever express concerns about your family situation?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes when clients have complex family dynamics, they take steps to ensure their spouse's financial security." As Helen printed the statements, I stared at the numbers that seemed impossible. These weren't modest emergency funds. These were substantial amounts, enough to live comfortably for decades. "How is this possible?" "I never signed anything." "You did?" Helen said gently, showing me documents with my signature. "It appears Noel brought you in to sign documents." Probably telling you they were routine banking updates. The realization hit me like a thunderbolt. While Wade and Romy were measuring my kitchen, planning their renovations, and treating me like a burden to be disposed of, I had resources they knew nothing about. There's one more thing, Helen said carefully. The trust account has been receiving transfers from Henderson Construction. I believe that was your husband's company. Yes, but Noel sold the business when he retired. Wade said the money barely covered debts. Helen consulted her screen again. According to our records, the business account is still active. Mrs. Henderson, I think you need to speak with the business accountant. Margaret Morrison's accounting office sat in a modest strip mall, but the revelation she delivered was anything but modest. Mrs. Henderson, she said, settling behind her desk, Henderson Construction wasn't sold. It was restructured 5 years ago. The business was transferred into a trust, with you as the primary beneficiary. The room seemed to tilt. I'm the owner of the construction company. The trust owns it, and you own the trust. It's been quite successful. She handed me the profit and loss statements. Your husband maintained oversight while Tom Bradley managed daily operations. The annual profits were substantial, more than enough to explain the regular deposits I'd seen in the trust account. Why didn't Noel tell me any of this? Margaret hesitated. He was concerned about family pressures. He mentioned that your son had been struggling financially and that his wife had expensive tastes. He worried that, if the family knew about the continued business income, there would be expectations that might compromise your security. She pulled out another file. These are loan agreements between the business and your son. Noel insisted on treating them as formal transactions. I opened the folder with shaking hands. Page after page of loan documents, each signed by both Noel and Wade. The amounts were staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars over 5 years. Has Wade been making payments? Margaret's expression grew uncomfortable. The outstanding balance with accumulated interest is approximately $87,000. Wade owed my business nearly $90,000 while claiming his father had left nothing but debts. Last month, Margaret continued, your son contacted me directly. He said he'd be taking over business management and asked me to prepare ownership transfer documents. He seemed surprised that you were involved at all. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd thought possible. Wade had been planning to claim the business along with the house, assuming I was too grief-stricken to understand what was happening. 3 days later, Wade called at 7 in the morning. Mom, we need to talk. Romy and I are coming over. They arrived exactly 20 minutes later, positioning themselves between me and the door like they were conducting an interrogation. I don't know what game you think you're playing, Wade began, but Tom Bradley says he can't provide business information without proper authorization. What did you tell him? I told him to follow proper procedures, I said calmly, settling into Noel's favorite armchair. Your father would have expected that. Wade is Noel's son and heir, Romy snapped. What more authorization does anyone need? Legal authorization. The kind that comes with actual ownership. I reached for the folder containing all the documents Margaret had given me. Your father's will leaves his possessions and this house to the family. But Henderson Construction isn't part of his estate. It hasn't been for 5 years. I pulled out the trust documents and set them on the coffee table. Henderson Construction has been owned by the Henderson Construction Trust since 2019. I am the sole beneficiary. The silence was deafening. Romy grabbed the documents first, her hands shaking as she read. Wade's face went pale. This is impossible, Romy whispered. You don't know anything about business. You're right, I didn't. But your father understood things about our family that I was too naive to see. I handed Wade the financial statements. The business has been quite profitable. Here are the records for the past 5 years. Watching Wade process the numbers was like watching someone realize they'd been playing checkers while everyone else played chess. He asked, his voice barely audible. Some of it went to you. Quite a lot. I pulled out the loan documentation. 87,000 over 5 years. To be precise. Romy grabbed the papers frantically. These say loans, Wade. You told me those were gifts. They were gifts, Wade protested weakly. Dad never asked for payments. He did. Margaret Morrison has copies of every conversation, every missed payment, every time your father chose to extend terms rather than demand what you owed. This doesn't change anything, Romy said desperately. The house still goes to Wade. That's worth more than some construction business. Is it? I asked mildly. Of course, there is the matter of the mortgage. Wade looked up sharply. What mortgage? Dad said the house was paid off. It was. But 18 months ago, your father took out a home equity loan for $350,000. The proceeds were transferred into the Henderson Construction Trust account. I pulled out the final documents. He was the sole owner at the time and didn't need anyone else's signature. Romy's face went white. That's not possible. Why would he do this? Wade asked, staring at the loan documents. For the first time, I let my carefully controlled emotions show. Because he was protecting me, Wade. He was making sure that no matter what happened, I would have financial security. Protecting you from what? From this, I said, gesturing to the scene before me. From being thrown out of my own home by family members who saw me as a burden instead of a person. Wade's hands shook as he set down the papers. Mom, surely we can work something out. You don't want to run a construction business. It is staying in the family, Wade. It's staying with me. But the mortgage payments, Romy said desperately. How will you afford them? The same way your father intended, with income from Henderson Construction. The business cash flow will easily cover the loan payments with plenty left over. I stood up, smoothing my dress. Now, I believe you mentioned something about moving out. I think that's still an excellent idea. Not for me, of course, but I'm sure you'll find somewhere lovely to start fresh. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of my oceanfront cottage in Mendocino, watching the morning sun paint golden streaks across the Pacific. The cottage had been another surprise. Noel had purchased it 3 years ago through the construction trust, along with a note. For Myrtle's retirement. When she's ready for ocean air and no schedule but her own. Henderson Construction continued to thrive under Tom Bradley's management. Wade and Romy had tried to contest the trust arrangements, but the law was clear. After 6 months of legal wrangling, they'd agreed to a payment plan that would take 8 years to complete, assuming they never missed a payment. Wade had sent a letter. Mom, I finally understand what Dad was doing. It took losing almost everything to see how much I'd taken for granted. I'm sorry for everything. The apology was genuine but motivated by consequences rather than conscience. If Wade wanted to rebuild our relationship, he could do it the same way he'd pay off his debt. Gradually, consistently, and over time. That evening, I did something I'd started doing every night since moving to the cottage. I sat on my deck with a glass of wine and watched the sunset, appreciating the simple fact that this view, this peace, this freedom was entirely mine. No one could take it away. No one could vote me out of my own life. No one could decide I was disposable. The cottage was quiet except for the ocean's rhythm and distant seabirds. Tomorrow I will tend my garden, maybe drive into town for lunch at the little bistro where the owner always saves me a table by the window. Simple pleasures that belonged entirely to me. As the last light faded, I raised my glass in a silent toast to Noel. He'd loved me enough to ensure I'd never be helpless. Never dependent on the mercy of people who saw me as expendable. And he'd loved me enough to make sure that when the test came, I'd have everything I needed to pass it. The ocean continued its eternal conversation with the shore, and I sat in my own home, living my own life, finally understanding what freedom meant. It meant never again having to beg for a place at a table that should have been mine by right. It meant peace. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever faced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments below.